But he sort of said, hey, you know, if you come back to Mexico, we'll be able to find you work. We'll be able to help give you a job sort of stuff. And it didn't take a lot to think about to decide, actually, that sounds like a good idea. I'll give it a go. I'll move to Mexico for 6 months and see how it is.
Off-Gassing, a scuba podcast with host Nick Hogel. Due to having asthma early in life, Skanda Coffield-Feith was turned away the first time he tried to enroll on a scuba course. Years later, while on a backpacking trip, he would find himself on Koh Tao experiencing his first breaths underwater. For a time, he enjoyed diving recreationally on holiday, until a random encounter introduced him to a dive club near his home in Australia. During a trip with the club, he found himself in Mt Gambier. Here, in the heart of the limestone coast, his journey into the overhead would begin. Please enjoy. Skanda, how are you doing this evening?
Very good, thank you. Very excited to be here.
Nice, yeah, no, I'm excited to have you on. It's a long time coming. I know we kind of chatted like a few months back, and then I arrived in Mexico. So, I'm really looking forward to hearing your story, hearing about your journey. So I will throw out my first question that I have for you is, tell me how and why you became scuba certified. Tell me about that first breath underwater, that first experience, the what, the how, the why that led up to that.
The where.
Yeah, the where. Yeah, that's actually very important too.
So I am originally from Melbourne in Australia. So if you know Australia, we're down in the southeast. So it's not really known for scuba diving. Everyone thinks Australia, scuba diving, they think Great Barrier Reef, right?
Yeah.
We're down, we're a cold water destination. We're on the bay, but it's, you know, not a tourist so much diving destination. It's growing now, but so I never really knew that there was diving there. And growing up, we went on a family holiday up to Queensland to the Great Barrier Reef, went out on a big boat from Cairns for the day and just to go snorkeling and stuff. And then there was people selling Discover Scuba Diving. So me and my mum thought, oh, you know, I might have been 10, 11, 12, some sort of age around that. Thought we could, you know, go and give it a shot. And going through the diver medical, I had asthma as a kid. And this was at the time where asthma was a big no-no for diving. So after checking the no, they were quite quick to say, yep, no diving for you, sorry.
Oh, wow.
See you later. So it wasn't actually something that I really thought much of growing up through high school in my late teens. And I did a lot of snorkeling and stuff around the bay and really liked that and saw some cool stuff snorkeling, but never really thought diving was a possibility. Fast forward, I was backpacking around Southeast Asia and met some friends in Thailand, and they had heard of Koh Tao and were like, hey, there's this place, there's supposed to be good diving there, let's go and learn to scuba dive. And I was like, well, yeah, you know, let's give it a shot. Maybe I can do it this time around. And sort of we found a dive center and sort of signed up for our open water courses and started going through the paperwork. And when I got to the asthma question and ticked yes, the instructor was very quick to ask, when was the last asthma attack? Oh, I haven't had one since I was a kid. Okay, let me take that medical form. Let me give you a new one. Just mark no, and off we go. So
that dive shop will remain unnamed.
Unnamed, of course. But, you know, now we know more, and the sort of stance on diving and asthma has changed a lot, I think, since then.
Yeah. But the protocols seem to be the same, because I feel like I've seen that happen quite a bit. Like, oh, okay, just, you know, if you say no on anything, then you can't do, or if you say yes on anything, then you can't do this course. So
or you have to get a medical, or warn the people, and they say no. Yeah.
So how was the open water course?
We really liked it, and me particularly. It was sort of, this is super cool. This is a lot of fun. We did a couple of days of diving for the open water course, and then immediately signed up for the advanced course off the back of that. We were like, yes, you know, this is cool. We like scuba diving. We want to be advanced open water divers. You know, I'm sure people listening could maybe have had that experience that you do a recreational course and you're like, yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I am the man.
It's the best feeling in the world. And sometimes, I mean, you know, I don't want to say ignorance is bliss, but it's like, so it's one of the best moments because you feel so accomplished and you feel like you've just done something so great, and then now you go into the advanced, and now you're the advanced open water diver. And it is such an amazing feeling, and that's why I do feel like I never try to take that away from anybody, because like, oh, I'm an advanced open water diver, and you know, I try to remember where I was so pumped, like I felt so accomplished. And then you start meeting tech divers and you're like, I know nothing.
Yeah, totally.
But Koh Tao, so tell me a little bit about the diving there. Do you remember?
I remember it being really nice. Lots of fish life, corals, you know, all that kind of typical tropical reef kind of stuff. Yeah, so that memory stayed with me for a while. And then I sort of became like a tourist diver recreationally. While I was studying in Australia, I was able to travel and backpack around Southeast Asia and always tried to fit in some diving wherever I went. So I got to go to some interesting places, dived in Malaysia, dived in Indonesia, dived in India, dived in Sri Lanka.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And always thought, one day I'll go back to Koh Tao. And fast forward a few years later, went back to Koh Tao with some friends again, traveling. And then it was a little bit like, this is not quite as nice as I remember it. This is, it's still all right, but it's not so interesting. Yeah.
No, and I've actually had that kind of same feeling because my first dive was in Thailand. Same thing, Koh PP.
Yeah.
And discover scuba diving. I just remember when I got underneath the water, it was like probably your typical, island discover scuba dive where we did like 30 minutes in the pool and then went right out into the open water. And I remember getting underneath the water and I was like, holy shit, I'm in Pandora from the movie Avatar. Like everything's so bright and this and that. And then I ended up going back a few years later after I'd been to Indonesia, and I was just like, wow, this isn't what I remember. But I think it's just that first experience.
I think so.
Shit, this is so amazing. But yeah, you definitely ticked off quite a few destinations.
Yeah.
And I haven't been to India in general, but I definitely, there's some places I'd like to go diving there. And it's like, it seems like all these different places are popping up now, and I'm just like, I want to go check it out there. I want to go check it out here. And then unfortunately, I, came to Mexico and did some diving here, and now I'm just like,
ruined.
Do I want to leave? But, so when, I'm assuming you were at the advanced level still when you were doing all this traveling?
Yeah, I didn't really get a bit more serious about diving until actually possibly that same trip where I went back to Koh Tao, or I happened to be in Indonesia, in Thailand, and met someone on a night bus from my hometown, and we started chatting about diving, as you do, and she started to tell me about the university dive club that she was a part of back in Melbourne.
Wow.
And I was like,
so you didn't know, you just randomly met a person from, okay.
Yeah. Just, happened to be sitting next to someone on a bus and just got chatting, and turns out they were a diver, and then from my hometown, and then diving back in my hometown. I was like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. That's really cool. Turns out that the university diving club that she was a part of had equipment, had tanks, had compressors, had a boat, or at that time, 2 boats.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, wow, that's one, super cool that I can dive at home, but it also sounds like they've got everything.
Yeah.
Because at this point I was, I had my mask. I didn't have any diving equipment of my own though. So it was like, wow, I can go home and rent gear from this diving club and start to dive at home. That's super cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then, so is that kind of when I guess the second progression, I should say, kind of started from there? Yeah.
So then things got a little bit more serious, because then I joined the diving club, was going out most weekends, and then started to buy my own equipment. And once you start to buy your equipment, then you're invested, right? You've got your regs, you've got your BCD, and you're like, well, I've got it. I've got to use it now. I've got to get out there and do my dives and make it worthwhile. After I was a student, so it was pretty expensive to buy regs and a BCD at that point. With the diving club, having compressors and having boats, and then I started to sort of learn about all of that side of things, because it was all volunteer club. So people were filling tanks, people were driving the boat and then taking turns to dive and that kind of thing. So within the club, there was a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience. and started to get introduced to a few more advanced forms of diving, I guess. So there was a guy on the dive boat that would dive in doubles.
Oh, yeah.
So you start to see that kind of thing. Like, oh, that's interesting. That looks pretty cool. Oh, you don't have to change your tanks over between dives. I like that.
So before you started progressing more down the recreational route, or I don't know, maybe you had where you started, did you kind of start going down the technical route, like the multiple tanks, 2 tanks, things like that, the DIR
So
method?
I guess I did a lot of diving in single tank. So I got certified at the beginning of 2006 in Thailand and did maybe 3 or 4 years of recreational holiday diving around Southeast Asia. And then in 2009, 2010, started to dive in Australia.
Okay.
And that was when things sort of then started to take off.
Was that your first experience with, because you said it was cold water diving? How was that?
So I did dive all year round in wetsuit.
Ooh.
And after doing 1 year in a wetsuit, it was like, no, I need a dry suit. Melbourne in winter, maybe we get down to 9 degrees in the water Celsius.
That's pretty cold.
And then
especially in a wetsuit.
Yeah, at the end of summer, you might get 20 degrees in the surface Celsius.
And it's not even so much. I would, if it was up to me, I'd never wear anything thicker than a 5 mil. I wouldn't even want to wear a 5 mil. I think 5 mil is kind of like pushing it. So it's not so much like when you're in the water. I feel like, that first initial shock, and then you're in the water and you're like, okay, this isn't bad. It's when you get out of the water and there's winter conditions, that's when the dry suit is like a killer for me, because, or it's a game changer, because then I'm like, oh, I can de-gear and I'm not like freezing as soon as I step out of the water. When you're in the water, you kind of acclimate.
That was our experience, or my experience, because we'd be diving, 30, 40-minute dives, fine, you don't get too cold, but we would be out on the dive boat all day. So you'd get out, you would have hour and a half, 2 hours while the other team dives, while you're in the rain, in the wind, in your wetsuit. You don't warm up. And then, you jump back in and it's all right while you're in the water, but then you have to get out again.
Okay.
So I went through all kinds of solutions to try to work out how to stay warm. I was putting those chemical heat packs down the front of my wetsuit. I would take a thermos of hot water that between the dives I would pour in my wetsuit to try and stay warm. Yeah, diving through winter like that, I did it. It was miserable. And after that, I decided I needed a dry suit.
At what point I was going to say, obviously at some point you made this into a career choice. At what point was that while you were diving with the dive club?
That was a lot later, actually. So
that
I became a dive professional in 2014.
Oh, okay. So what, were you just doing a lot of fun diving, just racking up dives in Australia?
A lot of fun diving in Australia and around. So with the dive club, it was super cool. We would go on a big trip or a couple of trips every year, but mostly a big ones, like 2 weeks, pick a location, go somewhere.
In Australia?
Oh,
okay.
But kind of off the beaten track, having our own boat, having our own compressor, we could go to places that you didn't need a dive center to dive from.
Oh, okay. Like tell me about some of the places.
We did 2 trips up to northern New South Wales. There's a fantastic place called Southwest Rocks, and off the coast there is a big rocky pinnacle that juts out of the ocean, and it's called Fish Rock Cave, and it's a cave. It's a full cave dive where you can dive from like 20 meters depth, 60 feet, and then pop out at 6 meters, 20 feet at the other end of the rock. That's kind of cool part, but then the best part of it is that there's a resident population of grey nurse sharks that hang out there. So you'll be diving and these sharks will just be cruising by. And it's just at this point on the east coast where you get a mix of tropical and temperate water marine life. So you have corals, but then you also have sort of cold water fish.
That sounds exciting.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. No, I've unfortunately I have not been to Australia. It's been
yes.
It's been a destination that I've wanted to go to for a long time, and now that I'm closer to that area of the world, I definitely, and I've been meeting different people from there, so I'm like, I have to take a trip there at some point, just because. Yeah, it'll happen. So just curious, that cave that you were talking about, was that kind of your first overhead experience, or had you done anything before that?
We have a bunch of wrecks around Melbourne, so I've done a lot of wreck diving, but that was the first sort of, other than sort of swim throughs and that kind of thing, that was the first sort of proper overhead. And it is a fairly decent cave. I think it's maybe 100 meters long from one side to the other.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So you're in the dark for a while.
So when did you start to kind of progress into a technical world? Was that, I'm assuming, with the dive club?
Yeah, so I got my doubles, I got my dry suit, I got a set of doubles and started to sort of dive that, not really knowing, what I was doing. Had a little bit of, this is how you manipulate your valves and you have your long hose on this side and that kind of stuff. It wasn't until we were on a club trip, we went to watch, there's a place in South Australia where giant cuttlefish aggregate every year. So there's this huge migration of cuttlefish and you go and you can dive and there's just cuttlefish everywhere. So we went to see that. It was pretty amazing.
Like how many cuttlefish?
Hundreds. I would be diving and you would see, like, looking at this room, all of those cushions would all be cuttlefish times 10 sort of stuff.
No shit.
Just cuttlefish everywhere.
Now
so
I definitely
that was super
have to
cool.
get to Australia.
Yeah, it was amazing. And then on the way back, though, we stopped in a little town called Mt Gambier.
Okay.
Which is sort of where most of the cave diving in Australia happens. And
so you just randomly stopped, or was it planned?
No, we planned to stop there. We planned to stop there on the way back. It kind of broke up the journey, and one of the guys in the club was a good friend of mine, Steve. He was already a cave diver at that point, so he took us around and showed us a couple of the dive sites that he got to go as a cave diver. And then we dove in a series of ponds, freshwater ponds that are spring-fed, and you have crystal clear visibility and after diving and having 5-meter visibility, this is a really nice change. I could get into this. And so pretty quickly after that, I signed up for a cavern class.
Oh, okay. So you weren't like nervous. You were like gung ho. Let's get in there.
Let's do this. And also at the time I was still studying, so there was also the bit of the benefit of the class was going to be a deep certification and an overhead certification. So it was like a recreational, deep and rec certification all in one. So I could do the one class, get sort of tick both boxes.
Yeah.
And, then also get to dive over in Mt Gambier.
Do you remember the first time you went into, I know you said some wrecks and then that other cave, but as you're in the cavern course, do you remember the first time you like going into the overhead? Is it like, were you nervous? Was it like, how was it?
I think there was a lot more stress, like a lot more, not nervous about being in the overhead, but performing for a course.
Yeah. I know all that.
Having an instructor looking at me and wanting to not fail the class.
Obviously cavern being kind of that first class, going into the overhead, were you just hooked immediately right after?
Yeah. The caverns over there in Mt Gambier are pretty nice. There's some of them compare very favorably with stuff we have here in Mexico.
Oh, really?
So going there and seeing them, like the training one obviously is a silty, muddy hole and, you touch the floor and it's zero visibility and it's pretty nasty. But once we got out of that and started to see some of the other sites, it was like, wow, this is stunning. This is beautiful.
The cavern course, is it... I guess because obviously I've only done one cavern course. I don't know like how they differ from different agencies or if you're in different parts of the world. Was it a pretty solid course? Like you're pretty happy with the course and everything? Looking back on it now.
The thing about Australia is the courses are slightly different because they're taught through the Cave Diving Association of Australia, which has its own little tweaks and their own little sort of funny quirks, I guess. I found the course amazing. I felt like my diving just went to a whole nother level taking the class. And I think that was more because it was the first time that we started to do sort of the foundational stuff that you would look at now in most, you go somewhere, you sign up for a course and they would ask you, hey, have you done like a fundamental sort of basics kind of course where you've practiced buoyancy and stability and you've learned how to dive your doubles or your side mount or something like that. And it was the first time that I did any sort of training using the doubles.
Okay.
So I felt like, wow, we worked on getting me trimmed out and hovering in neutral buoyancy and all that kind of stuff that we need as divers and more so as diving into the overhead. And it felt like my diving went quite far up. Ability-wise, advanced quite a lot over that, those couple of weekends. Because previously, if you're just diving around, you don't really know how your buoyancy is. Maybe you don't have a buddy that's telling you you're off trim. all that kind of stuff.
I'll be honest, when I first kind of started looking into that, because I was, I always joke around and say at heart, like, I'll always be a recreational diver. Give me a 30-foot reef and I'm just a happy camper.
Yeah.
But, obviously there's a better way to do it. And I don't even want to say a better way to do it, a different way to do it, right?
Yeah.
Like, because I'm not going to knock anybody if, they want to do the diving that they do as long as they stay safe, right?
Sure.
But yeah, I remember when I kind of started getting into that, it was a little bit tough for me just because I think I developed so many bad habits.
Yep.
So it was kind of like breaking those habits. Like I knew buoyancy, like I'd be like, yeah, I know how to be neutral in the water, but staying in trim is a different story than being neutrally buoyant in the water. And then so for me, it was like a very kind of rigid program at first because I'm like, man, this is, I'm like tense. I got to, like do all this. And then you kind of develop the muscles and get a little bit better. Yeah. So you did doubles. When did you get introduced to side mount?
So side mount was something that I did here in Mexico.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I had seen a little bit of side mount back in Australia, but it hadn't really taken off at that point, at least in Australia. This was like 2012, 2013 when I was cave diving in Australia. And there are a few people doing it, but it wasn't so common.
So you went full cave in Australia?
I did cavern and intro in Australia and then came to Mexico. I had sort of 6 months between jobs and thought it would be a good use of my time to come to Mexico, become an open water instructor and do my full cave training at the same time.
Oh, okay. So I'm curious, because you said in Australia it's a little bit different. What about the intro class? Is it pretty similar or is there some big differences?
There is a pretty big difference, and that is around the stress test. So
okay.
I think I may be wrong, but at each level in Australia there's a stress test and it's a pass or fail kind of thing.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which doesn't sit quite well with me now, particularly what I do now. But the intro course, part of the big difference, the stress test, is you have to do a zero visibility exit from the cave while buddy breathing. So you're sharing one regulator.
Okay.
Yeah. So the face that you're just making kind of sums up a lot of my feelings about it now, because it's a completely unrealistic scenario to ever have to practice. Like, if we think about this, what would have had to have gone wrong to end up at this point where we're in zero visibility, sharing gas with one working regulator?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's a lot more things that could go wrong than right. And then, yeah, that would definitely, I mean, because I've heard different arguments of introducing stress to a diver in certain levels to kind of, I don't want to say build that stress tolerance. I don't really think that's the right way to look at it, but just kind of like, what's the breaking point, right? And
everyone's going to have a breaking point though.
Yeah.
We can push until we reach a breaking point, but maybe it's not so useful. Maybe it's better to work on scenarios that are realistic and put people through training scenarios that are going to be more realistic, that get them to think and get them to practice skills.
So is that something that they still do today, like the stress test?
I believe so.
Oh, wow.
I believe so.
Buddy breathing in zero visibility. How did you find that?
So it's also one of those strange things that everybody knows about, and so people are told to prepare and go and do it on their own sort of thing. So I went with a buddy that was also taking the course, and we went down and practiced a couple of weekends under a pier where, we put a bit of a line and then we had someone watch us and we took off our masks and then we practiced. I take a breath, I pass you the reg, you take a breath. One diver sort of controls the line, one diver controls the long hose. And it was an interesting exercise. When we actually went and did it on the course, it did not go so well. And so full disclosure, I failed the course while this was going on.
So I don't know how I feel about that either. If it's a pass or fail, like we're going to stress you
I feel
out.
like it wasn't a fair sort of pass or fail sort of thing because my buddy got to continue. But anyway, what had happened was he had lost buoyancy. So we were sort of there holding onto the line. I was holding the line. He was on the ceiling. When we were passing this regulator between us, and then the regulator started to free flow so that I started to get breaths of water, as well as the gas, and getting a bit of a feeling of waterboarding. And at a certain point, I could feel that panic was getting real, and this was not a safe situation. And not being able to see anything, I didn't know where the instructor was. We weren't really on the line anymore. Like, I had it gripped, pulling up on it because my buddy was above me somewhere, sort of passing the regulator between us. And at a certain point, I was like, I don't feel safe. I don't feel like anyone is in control. And I switched to my regulator, and we came out, we debriefed, and then they're like, sorry, you can't continue the class.
Oh, man.
And I was like, well, that sucks a bit.
So did at some point you went back and completed it?
Yeah. Okay, so then I went back and did it again, and that all went fine. Yeah. I don't know how I feel about this pass or fail kind of thing. I think that definitely here in the teaching that we do here, we're a lot more encouraging of people. And if someone has a problem or isn't able to do something, we work on it until they are. And I guess in a team environment when there's multiple people, maybe that's not always the easiest thing to do. Maybe you have to split up classes or that kind of thing. Yeah, I think in my case, there would have been time to say, okay, let's go back in and let's do it one more time. Rather than be like, ciao, bye.
It's, and I feel bad. Like, I mean, we're obviously in the future now, so you can kind of look back on it and be like, well, I don't know how I feel about that. And so I don't mean to laugh at the situation, but I've had a couple of scenarios where I was like starting to panic, right? And actually one of them was fairly recent when we were doing, I was going through my full cave training, and I was doing a zero visibility exit, so no mask, the blackout mask, the blackout mask. And I thought I was like pretty good, but I mean, I can't remember everything. I tried, but we had the line going in, and then we're like, okay, blackout mask, we're going out. And it got to a point where, and I actually got video of this, which was really, really cool. Yeah. It's so different to see it like, from the different perspective than actually looking into it. But, I got to a point and like, I couldn't go through and the line was going, and I tried again, and I'm like, okay. And at this point, like, I'm kind of cold cause it's, a little bit into the dive. And I'm just thinking, like, is the instructor fucking with me right now? Like, what's going on? Obviously not, And I know I'm in a safe environment, but there's just still a little bit, like, my heart's kind of racing. And I'm like, man, if this was a real scenario, this would be scary as shit, right? Yeah. And so, and then finally, like, at the last moment, not even the last moment, or the right before I made it through, because I'm sitting there just kind of thinking, I'm like, okay, well, let me feel around, right? And it's funny because when you look at it, it's basically like I was kind of going underneath when I just kind of had to tilt a little bit and go through. Yeah. And I remembered it going in, but like, when you're doing the zero vis exit, it was just kind of like a holy shit moment, and I'm like, man, if this was real, this would be scary. So let's not ever let this happen.
And I think that's the other thing, right? Like, what we should sort of be working towards or trying to work on in training is ending things before it gets to that point. If stuff is not feeling right on the way in, if something goes wrong, we want, or at least I would like my students to be calling the dive beforehand. And that extends to my own diving as well. I was quite happy in some ways. I had a dive called on me yesterday where my buddy was like, actually, I don't feel ready for the dive that we wanted to do. I've got too much going on mentally. I'm not feeling up for it. I don't want to put myself and anyone else in a situation that might be unsafe. I'm just going to say no before we even start and go for the dive.
That's huge.
And I think that's a super good thing to do, because what happens if, then they go and do the dive, they're not feeling comfortable, they're already thinking, something's not right, I'm not really up for this dive. And then something happens, maybe there's always going to be that regret of, well, I should have called it when I thought about calling it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and that's a huge thing too, because I mean, I'm sure, because you're obviously doing some pretty big things out there to, have that pressure on, say you're on a exploration or this or that, and it's all kind of like, I mean, I know they talk about it a lot in the human diver. It's like you have all this pressure, and it's like you feel like you should go, but just to be like, you know what, not today. It's just something's not right. And because I know like a lot of people, including myself, it's like you don't want to feel like you're letting anybody down, but to be in an environment with good friends, good teammates, to know like, okay, I'm going to call this dive. And I've actually even heard some people say like 3's my mark. Like, if I wake up and something goes wrong, there's 1, right? Yeah. Like, just have a bad morning, drive in, something happens, there's 2, right? And then before you even get to the dive site, like, oh, I forgot this piece of equipment, there's 3. I'm just going to call it for the day. So you completed your cavern intro, and how was the second time around with the intro?
I don't really have a very strong memory of it, so it must have been fine. I think it all went well, and then did a bunch of intro diving back in Australia.
Okay, and there's quite a big cave scene in Australia, correct? I mean, they have their, like you said, their own association.
They have their own association, and there's, I guess, goes up and down with the amount of activity that people are doing. But yeah, there's always a bunch of divers getting out there diving, a few instructors teaching. Yeah, there's a scene.
So you came to Mexico because you wanted to become an instructor and do your full cave. And I know it's obviously, I think, once you kind of start getting, I would assume once you start kind of getting into the overhead cave diving scene, world, whatever you want to call it, Mexico
comes up. You hear about Mexico. You hear about the cave diving in Mexico, and it goes on the bucket list.
Yes. So tell me about your first time. Was it your first time coming to Mexico?
Yeah, so I was sort of between jobs, had decided that I was a bit bored of living in Melbourne and wanted to move overseas and give living overseas a bit of a try. At the same time, the dive club that I was a part of didn't have an instructor in the club, so we did a lot of mentoring and that kind of thing, but then for people to go and get a certification for whatever, they would have to go to another dive centre and do a class and that kind of thing. And what we wanted was to be able to have a way of, within the club, having someone that could certify and sort of sign off on people that were ready for whatever level. Because we had this situation where some good friends that had been diving for years, and his dad had a boat, so they were always going out on the boat on weekends and diving and that kind of thing. But they only had an open water certification. So they went over to Bali to go, they were on holiday, and they just signed up on a couple of days diving just because they were there and thought that getting in a dive would be cool. And were told that because they didn't have an advanced certification, they couldn't go to the deeper sites.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, we have all of this experience. We've dove to whatever depth and this, that, the other. And they were like, no, sorry, because you're not certified, we can't take you. So that was kind of a big push to sort of, it would be cool to become an instructor, to be able to help people within the club to do that kind of thing. In my other life, I was a high school teacher. So it also fitted kind of nicely with, high school teacher, and I was in a position where I had been able to set up some interesting programs within the school. So we were looking at, in the future, setting up like a scuba diving program, marine biology program, that kind of thing. So it was like, this will be good for that, and it'll be good for the club. And
is it the same? Because I know like in the States or in the US, high school teachers, it's like, okay, this is the subject. This is my teacher for this subject. This is my, what subject? Or is it kind of like a general ed type? Is it different in that sense?
I trained as a geography, history and English teacher. But the last high school that I was working at in Australia, I did a range of other things as well. So I was teaching physical education, coaching sport teams. We were a very small school, and so people had to do a bunch of different things that maybe they weren't specialised in.
Yeah.
But it also meant that working with some of the other teachers, we were able to create some pretty cool programs, and scuba diving would have been something we possibly looked into.
Was teaching something that you wanted to get into for, like, was that kind of like a choice, or was it just kind of like happened by, not accident, but just kind of what happened?
Happy accident. Yeah, it wasn't really something I thought of after high school or anything like that. I went to university 4 years, did an arts degree, so a liberal arts, sort of studied a lot of politics and history, and came out of that and didn't really have an idea of what I wanted to do, but thought I'd give teaching a go and see, because, at least I'd be able to maybe teach geography or history or politics or stuff that interested me. And that was the stuff that I liked when I was at high school as well. I remember having an international studies teacher that really sort of made it interesting and made me enjoy school a lot more. So I thought maybe I could do something like that.
Oh man, I feel like
students.
teachers are, especially in the US, they're completely, I mean, they really are, I don't want to say the future, but they are, they're teaching future generations.
For sure.
And having a good teacher makes such a big difference. Like I would almost guarantee that like anybody listening to this podcast will remember their favorite high school teacher.
For
remember
sure. There's going to be a lot of maybe teachers you don't really remember, or maybe you don't have the best memories of their classes, but then people will have that memory of that teacher that made a difference.
And those teachers, I mean, they really make a difference. So it's I feel like, and I know in some parts of the world they're compensated pretty well, but I know in the US it's kind of it's sad to see a lot of people will get out of it because of the fact that they'll teach full time, but they can't make a living. And it's a really sad thing to see.
Super sad.
Here you are essentially inspiring the next generation, but then you have to give it up because you got to keep the lights on. Right. Yeah. So there should be a better way. So you were a teacher. So was it like just summer vacation that you had off and then?
So I had been teaching in Australia and at the time decided I'd like to take a bit of a break and see how it is to live overseas. So signed up for a job at an international school. So I thought I'd go and teach overseas for a year in another school in another place and just get a different experience. And it just so happened that the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere school years are different.
Oh,
so in Australia, we start school in January and finish in December, which to me makes sense.
I mean, you start so it's a year long?
School is,
Oh, wow. Okay. So there's no like summer well, wait a minute. If you start...
You have summer vacation, but it's between the high school or the school years.
Oh.
Because our summer is December, January, February.
Oh, okay.
So everything is a little bit different, right?
Okay.
So, I finished my school year in December and then had my job lined up to start in the new year in the Northern Hemisphere, but that wasn't until July. So I had all of this time then where I could...
What am I going to do?
And I could have stayed on and continued teaching at the school that I was at for another half year and then said, okay, see you later. I'll leave and go to this other job. But I thought, take the opportunity, go somewhere, become a scuba diving instructor. Had a look around at a few different places, but had traveled through Southeast Asia a bunch and had done a bit of diving around and thought, I want to go somewhere pretty different. Maybe I'm not going to have an opportunity like this again where I have a big chunk of time. Go to Mexico, travel around the Americas. I can also do some cave diving.
Yeah, no. So when you landed in Mexico, where was the first place? Like, was it, I'm assuming fly into Cancun and then make your way down. So was it Playa?
Yeah.
Did you make it down to Tulum?
No, I didn't really make it down into Tulum initially. I sort of signed up for an instructor course in Playa del Carmen. So sort of pretty quickly landed, sort of got orientated and then went down to the dive center and sort of met the people there and started to do recreational dives. And I had to do my dive master course, so it was sort of a bit of ticking boxes there and sort of getting that done and just basically trying to dive as much as possible and see what the diving was like here.
Yeah. So how was your introduction into the professional side of it? Because there's definitely a difference from being like, okay, I'm the recreational diver having fun. Now you're the dive professional on the boat.
Yeah, it was a bit different sort of to wrap my head around some of the dive professional duties sort of thing, like the briefings, the getting people organized, the getting people ready. Because coming from a club diving scenario where we did everything ourselves, you had to be pretty squared away to come diving because there was no one that was going to hold your hands and stuff. Yeah. So
now you're literally holding people's
hands and sort of, so that took a little bit of getting used to, I guess. But I had a lot of diving experience by the time I made it to Mexico. I think had done 600 dives or something like that. And that was in doubles, in dry suit, technical dives, cave dives. In some ways, I found it a little bit hard to step back and put myself in this position of new diver. And I remember doing some skills demonstrations with another instructor in the pool and being told, don't do that in neutral buoyancy, don't do that back finning thing, it looks too hard, it makes things look too difficult. And I'm like, I don't know. I not really comfortable not being in neutral buoyancy anymore.
Yeah. No, that's strange. I mean, it should be strange. It's not strange, I guess. And
Unfortunately, it's not so strange, but it should be.
And so, what point were you like, okay, Mexico, this, like, how long have you been in Mexico? Did you ever leave? Or?
Yeah, so this was at the beginning of 2014, and I stayed for nearly 6 months. So I did my dive master and instructor stuff, and at the same time, I was coming down to Tulum and doing full cave training.
Okay.
When there wasn't particular stuff that I had to be doing in Playa, I would come down and I'd signed up to do full cave here with ProTech.
Oh, okay. So you did your training with ProTech.
I did my training at ProTech. I remember Kelvin and Annabelle, because they were still working at ProTech at that point.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So it was cool. It was, coming down, leaving all the recreational stuff behind and doing full cave training with Kim in doubles.
How was that? Tell me about that whole experience.
We actually had a super fun class and quite a different course, because it just so happened that some people I knew from Australia were coming around the same time. We sort of lined it up so that I would join the training that they were doing. And it was a guy and his girlfriend, and she hadn't done cave training, or maybe she'd done cavern but not intro or something like that. So we ended up doing basically the course from the beginning again, just sort of reviewing, recapping. I think we probably did about 10 days of training, something like that, maybe a few more. But I really enjoyed it because it was seeing things from a completely different perspective, a lot of time in the cave, a lot of time diving, team of 2, team of 3. And very, very eye-opening into another way of diving, or different sort of philosophies on diving, that kind of thing.
And this was all still in back mount doubles?
This was still in doubles, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were here for a little bit, then left, then ended up coming back. Were you just like, you left and then you're like, I need to make it back to Mexico? Or how did that work out?
Yeah, so I was here for a few months, and after doing the full cave course, I had seen a lot of side mount around and had already been curious from seeing it back in Australia. I remember one of the guys on my intro to cave class being in side mount, and just him flat in the water, perfect trim, and us in doubles really fighting to flatten out. And remember being interested, but there wasn't really much in Australia. I think I tried a Nomad, one of the Dive Right Nomad harnesses with a friend, and I'm sure it looked terrible, and I'm sure my tanks were all over the place. But yeah, and then as part of my open water instructor course, we did a try side mount day where they put us in a rental harness and sort of didn't really do much adjusting and just swam around the pool. I was like, yeah, this is pretty cool. I would like to do this properly. And so signed up for a cave side mount course with Kim a few months later and loved it. So it was really cool to, the feeling compared to doubles. I really liked the freedom that you got with side mount, not constantly having to strain your neck to look up. But also we went to a few places that I had been to in doubles and had got to a point in the cave where I just wasn't able to pass. And going back in side mount and getting to pass the restriction, past that major restriction on the map, and get into the part where back mount divers don't fit was super cool.
I'm sure like that's probably a turning point for, I would assume a good majority of people, like they're in the back mount doubles, they stick with it, and then it's like, oh, I can't go in there because I'm not, my profile is too big. And so you trained with ProTech, and then was it like, how did you end up working there?
Yeah, so then this was 2014. I left, I went to my high school job, and that was in Taiwan. So I moved to Taiwan for a year. Okay. Which was a lot of fun. It was a really amazing place to live. I did a bit of diving while I was there, taught a few open water courses. But
how was the diving there?
Stunning, amazing. Okay. Really, really. I think Taiwan is quite unknown and underrated for a lot of things.
Really? Okay. I know one of my former instructors will go there and teach some rebreather courses. So I know there's diving there, but I guess I don't really know much about it. I'll have to check it out.
I didn't know much about it, and then looking at jobs and like just looking at the stuff that I like to do and around places that I would like to consider to live, it kind of ticked the boxes because you have ocean right there. So you've got diving, snorkeling. On one coast you can go surfing. It has mountains, so you can go hiking. In the winter, there's all the winter sports kind of stuff. Yeah. It's rock climbing. So, yeah, it kind of ticked a lot of boxes in terms of a place to live. And, amazing food, super nice people, and really incredibly good diving.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually one of my, and I joke around about it a lot with people is because I think I currently live in Malaysia, and have spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia, and I feel like the level of hospitality there is just far greater. Like the people there are so nice. I mean, Thailand's like the land of smiles. I feel the same thing about Malaysia. Like everybody's so giving and nice over there. It's just like a whole nother world. So you left Mexico. Were you just daydreaming of Mexico the whole time until you made it back?
Yeah. So unfortunately, the job didn't quite work out 100%. And
In Taiwan?
In Taiwan. It wasn't quite what I was expecting, I guess. And spent a lot of time just hanging out at the high school because I had finished my classes, finished all my planning, had all my marking done, had all my lesson prep done, but had a lot of time on my hands to kill because the high school day was 8 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh.
So quite a long day.
Yeah, very long day.
Particularly only if you only teach 3 hours or something like that. There's quite a lot of dead time.
Oh.
So I spent a lot of time watching cave diving videos.
Do you remember who you were watching videos
well,
from?
the sort of the standout ones, the really memorable ones was around that time, Patrick and Philip went to Madagascar for their first trip and then went back the year later with a bunch of other guys, with Kim, with Mauro, a bunch of people.
Did you know Patrick at this point?
I hadn't met Patrick, but I sort of got hooked on watching the Dominican Republic Speleological Society videos. And so just from watching that sort of stuff, I was like, I need to get back to Mexico. I need to get cave diving again. Yeah, sort of the year ended up in Taiwan and then did a little bit of travel around Asia and then had a month in Tulum and was cave diving every day pretty much and really enjoying it. And I remember chatting with one of the instructors about that I was being guided by hey, how is it to live here? What's the process? How is it sort of thing? And then kind of at the end of the trip, I was just chatting with Kim and sort of saying, I'm not sure what I'm going to go and do next. I'm going back to Australia, don't really have a job lined up, not really sure if I want to get back into the high school classroom. I'm not sure how serious at the time, but he sort of said, hey, if you come back to Mexico, we'll be able to find you work, we'll be able to help give you a job sort of stuff. And it didn't take a lot to think about to decide, actually, that sounds like a good idea. I'll give it a go. I'll move to Mexico for 6 months and see how it is to work in diving full time.
Yeah. And obviously, I mean, you're here today.
Things worked out.
So how you made it back, did you immediately start working for ProTech or were you kind of floating around until they had an opening or how did that all come about?
So I moved here with the idea of being here for 6 months at the beginning of 2016. Pretty much from the beginning, I had a car because I'd managed to coordinate with some people that were leaving to buy their old shitty Jeep Cherokee, falling apart, leaking. But it meant I had a vehicle and I could go diving. And yeah, pretty much from the beginning, I was working at ProTech and so I started cabin tours. And first of all, it was a few months where I was just following the other instructors around and sort of seeing how they did everything, seeing how they gave briefings, learning the dive sites, getting to know where the lines start, all that kind of stuff. But at the time, it was a small staff. There was 4 of us working out of the Tulum shop, and 2 of them would go away for the summer.
Oh.
So as soon as sort of June, July rolled around, 2 of the guys went back to Europe for the summer there, and it just left Kim and I here holding down the fort. So it meant that I was sort of able to do a bit more stuff over the low season.
So at that point, you start progressing towards, I'm assuming you had your mindset on becoming a full cave instructor?
Initially not, no. It was more, I thought I would come and see how it was to live here and see how it goes. And at the time I also had a girlfriend back in Australia, so, we were doing a long distance thing. Unfortunately, I decided that I wanted to be in Mexico, she wanted to be in Australia. We weren't able to make that work out. And once that sort of decision was made, then it was like, okay, now I'm committed to Mexico. Let's see how this goes. Let's see what I can do here.
Yeah.
And that's when I started to work on the instructor side of things.
Another thing that I'm curious about, because I want to say have done your fair share of exploration. And I feel like some of the people that I've met down here, once they start cave diving quite a bit, it seems like kind of, especially Mexico, exploration and cave diving kind of go hand in hand. Obviously, there's people doing a little bit more than others. But when did you kind of start wanting, or was that just kind of from the beginning, like, I want, to go find that virgin cave?
Yeah, so it was never really something that from the beginning I thought I could do. Like I was saying, I was watching these videos of exploration and this kind of stuff, but it always felt like that was something extreme, something that needed a lot of experience, that kind of thing. But after living here, I guess 3 years and doing pretty much just diving every day. If I wasn't working, I would go cave diving. I was guiding caverns. Some days we would come back at 3 o'clock kind of thing, and I was super keen, so I would still grab a new set of tanks and go cave diving after finishing a day of work. So I was diving a lot.
Yeah.
And, a little bit down the line then ended up doing a survey class to sort of learn about how to survey a cave, how to collect the data, how to sort of plot it in the computer programs that we have. From then, I started to do more dives with the purpose of surveying the caves. And it was more to get to know a cave really well, to get to practice the skills, and then to put something together that I thought was interesting and useful. So I started to do a lot of diving in Mayan blue, which I'm sure you've been to.
Yeah.
To this day, it's one of my favorite caves because it's so varied. But one of the things I really enjoyed was just to dive every line and to get to see all the cave and to survey it and to know how it all fits together, where the lines go, where they end up. If you do a jump here, where do you end up, sort of stuff. So initially I was just doing a lot of surveying for myself just to get to know the cave and to get to know where things are. And then started to see blank spaces on some of the map that was coming together, and initially didn't really find a whole lot of new cave, but put a little bit of line here and there, and it's like, this is kind of cool. It's cool to go and see something that people haven't seen before, and then to be able to share that with other people. Then some friends had lost some survey data from a few caves, and sort of then we're like, oh well, Skanda, you like surveying, you go and resurvey this. So I started to go to a few sort of more off the beaten track kind of places and do some resurvey of lines that had been lost to be able to add it to the overall data. And then from that sort of started to see more stuff. And then they also invited me to come explore a couple of times as well. So that it was like, yeah, this is fun. This is cool. It's a day out with friends, people that I sort of looked up to. So good day out diving with people that are fun to hang out with. And then we would sometimes find a cave. And then I was like, I want to keep doing this.
That's awesome. Is there, do you have like a highlight moment of any of the explorations that you've been on?
I mean, there's a lot of really fun moments, but so many.
Yeah. No.
No, but I mean, we one of the most fun days was I was diving with Kim and Philip in a cave, and Philip was filming. So we had to have it on video that it was a part of the cave where we had sort of got to the end of, in open circuit, it was a double stage dive with scooters to get to the end. Because of how the cave was, it took quite a bit of time to get there. So open circuit, you would get to the end of the cave, and then you didn't really have any gas or much gas left to keep going and finding things. So it sort of had this big end of line, left open, looked like the cave continued, and we went back there with the rebreathers, and the cave continued, and each of us emptied a reel and filmed it. And it was like, wow, what a day.
Yeah.
Spending the day with friends, doing a super cool dive in beautiful cave and getting to explore it and film it at the same time.
Yeah. Oh man. So obviously the rebreather kind of changed the game as far as cave exploration, and I'd even say the Sidewinder has changed, kind of like was able to push cave exploration just to great length. So was that the first unit or were you rebreather certified, or tell me about your path into that world?
Yeah, good question. So the Sidewinder is my third rebreather.
Okay.
So I initially trained on a Pelagian, which is another back mount MCCR, and then crossed over to the JJ. Had a JJ for a little while, But it was never quite the rebreather for my diving here in Mexico. Fantastic rebreather, both the Pelagian and the JJ, but it just didn't really suit what I was doing. JJ's big, heavy, and when I was going to use it, I would only use it for dives where I needed a rebreather, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Here, with the caves generally being kind of shallow and having a pretty good gas consumption, I could match most rebreather divers, even open circuit.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I remember guiding a couple we did a dive to the Blue Abyss one day from Pet Cemetery, and I did a double stage dive. They were both on rebreathers, and we ended up doing a nearly 5-hour dive. Came out and they were amazed that I was able to do it on open circuit. I was like, well, most of the dive we were in 6 meters average depth. I'm hardly using a lot of gas. So for most of the diving, I didn't really need a rebreather. Going a bit deeper or doing something long and complex, it made it a lot easier. But the JJ was something that I used for a particular dive rather than something that I would break out every day. Part of that was because it was big and heavy. Maybe also because I didn't use it that frequently. I never got super comfortable on it. There was always like a couple of minutes getting my trim, getting my buoyancy, working that out again. Okay, now I'm good to go. Whereas the Sidewinder, I find I want to dive it every day, even if I don't need to. It's just a fun thing to play with.
Like I said, I mean, it definitely was a game changer for pushing cave exploration, I would assume, because now you could go further. Well, I mean, I know that's the argument, if it's safer, if it's not, but I mean, it definitely is a tool that allows you more time.
We have more time.
Yeah.
And the big thing we often found was that open circuit bubbles would hit the ceiling, cause percolation, and then you would come back and the visibility wouldn't be great. It might not be zero visibility, it might not be something you need to hold the line to, but if you're looking for new cave tunnels and you can't really see very clearly the wall, or if there's a big hole or an opening or another passage, it made it really difficult to explore. Often we would sort of silt out or cause bad visibility in a section of cave and then have to come back and check the next day because you just wouldn't be able to see if there was more things going on there. Whereas with the rebreathers now, less bubbles, less percolation, it meant we could really sort of stay in a place and exhaust the exploration potential there before turning around and coming back out and saying, okay, yeah, no, there's no more cave here, or there is, and let's keep going with the exploration. Okay. So that was a big one. And then just having time as well, particularly if you have to get quite far back in the cave, you might only have a pretty limited amount of gas at that point to explore. So there was often times where we would be diving, and even though the cave might continue, we'd have to turn on gas. And the rebreather just takes away that need to turn because of the limited gas supply.
Oh, yeah. And so I'm currently going through like my rebreather training, and, so we're kind of going in the cavern zone. It's so weird how different it is. It's such a game changer. And I've even heard that about rebreathers in general, like, oh, okay, it's, the silent world or whatnot. And I've heard so much about it. And then I'm just like, holy shit, this is so crazy. It's like a whole nother level of meditation, right? Like I was explaining it to somebody. I used to talk all the time like, oh, I love scuba diving because it's so quiet. And this is open circuit, right? And I'm like, it's so quiet. I love it so much. And then now it's like with the rebreather, I'm like, holy shit.
Those open circuit dives are so noisy, blowing bubbles, ruining my peace and quiet.
So typical, you have a day off, you're going to go dive. Are you busting out the rebreather, or do you even try it? Do you even want to do open circuit anymore?
Yeah, I mean, mostly if I have a day off, I want to do something nice, do a nice long dive. I don't want to go for an hour and a half. I want to go for 3-4 hours. So it's the rebreather comes out. Go and do something interesting for me.
What's interesting? Like, are you going to try to do some exploration? Just go survey? Like, you have a day off, you got the rebreather, the scrubbers are filled, tanks are filled. What are you doing?
It depends a little bit what I feel like and who I'm diving with on that day. I'm quite happy to go and do a nice long dive and just check out cave that I haven't seen before. That's the other thing here in Mexico, is that we have so much cave that, you could dive every day and see different things and not be exploring, not be laying new line, but just seeing different parts of different cave systems. So there's a ton of places that I haven't been that I would like to go still, and just sort of follow the line that's there and see where it takes me. So that's always fun, grab a scooter, go a little bit further in. I don't do a whole lot of guiding now, mostly I'm teaching. And so whenever I do get to guide, it's like, makes me remember how cool the caves are that we have here, and makes me think like, that jump over there, I haven't seen what's down there. I need to come back here another day and check out all the jumps that I haven't been to in this particular cave. Or so, go somewhere that maybe I've been to before or not, and just see a bunch of cave that's new to me is super fun.
So it's kind of funny because it's like you left the teaching world to just get right back into
Yeah.
Well, all right, man. I have one last question for you before I let you go. And this has been awesome, man. Thank you very much for joining the podcast.
Nice to hang out and chat.
But I always like to end off some sort of advice question. And so as someone that has taught many people to go into the overhead, into the darkness, whatever you want to call it, what is the best piece of advice that you could give to somebody that is looking to get into this sort of diving? The overhead, maybe they want to go for their cavern, or they know that they want to go for their full cave, but they just know that they want to get into the overhead. What is the best piece of advice you can give to that person?
1, dive a lot, but 2, find some people that can give you a really solid foundational course that will really help take your diving to that next level, that will prepare you then, that will set you up for success with your cavern or whatever overhead training. I remember that when I did my cavern class, we were kind of showed a back fin, but weren't really explained explicitly how to do a back fin. And it was always like, this is something that you'll just sort of pick up how it's done eventually. This is something we need to be able to do, but you'll work it out, sort of thing, which I found pretty unhelpful. And I remember the first time I was asked to demonstrate a back fin here, and having to think about how I break this down and how I can teach someone this in some easy steps. And that was a little bit of a moment for me that like, wow, I wish I'd been told you do 1, 2, 3, 4, you're going to move backwards through the water, rather than, this is something you'll get it. You'll get it with experience. So
keep trying.
Keep trying.
You build the bad habits.
We do build bad habits. And I mean, the other thing is getting a good course, or having been taught that from the beginning, would have fast-tracked and made things so much more comfortable and easy for the rest of my diving, because instead of having to struggle and try and then end up possibly swimming around in a circle to get back to the place where I needed to be, if I'd just been able to do an effective back kick from the beginning, it would have been fantastic. Yeah, I guess the advice is seek out people that can give really solid foundational training that will set you up for success for whatever diving then you go and continue.
Skanda, I absolutely appreciate you coming onto the podcast. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. And yes, I hope to, I'll have to, next time I come back to Mexico, when I come back to Mexico, I'll have to try to set up a guided tour or something with you. So might not be, the most fun, but who knows? Maybe it'll be some fun stuff.
For sure. We can do some really cool stuff.
Awesome, man. Well, I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. You too.
Off-gassing, a scuba podcast.